I was buried in legal briefs when the banging started at my front door. Not a knock, not a doorbell, but an authoritative pounding that made my coffee mug rattle. As State Attorney General, I dealt with my share of aggressive process servers, but this was different. When I opened the door, I found two men in what looked like police uniforms, except something was off about them. "Francis Lambert?" one asked, his badge catching the morning light in a way that made my prosecutor's instincts tingle. "You're under arrest for violations of community standards and resisting HOA authority." I blinked, momentarily speechless. My modest colonial-style home in Oak Ridge Estates had been my sanctuary for 3 years, the one place I could escape the pressures of being Pennsylvania's top law enforcement official. Now these men were claiming to arrest me, over my landscaping? "Excuse me? You're arresting me for HOA violations?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "That's right, sir. Ms. Karen Whitfield has authorized your detention until you comply with community standards." The second officer produced what looked like handcuffs. "Please turn around, sir." That's when I knew something was very wrong. No HOA, no matter how power-hungry, has arrest authority. I stepped back, keeping the door partially closed. "I'd like to see your badges and identification, officers." They exchanged glances. The taller one thrust a badge wallet toward me. I didn't need to examine it closely to see it was fake, a cheap replica you could buy online. My heart rate quickened, not from fear but from the realization that someone had sent imposters to my home posing as law enforcement, a felony in all 50 states. "Gentlemen, I think we have a problem," I said calmly. "I'm Francis Lambert, State Attorney General of Pennsylvania, and you are attempting to impersonate peace officers, which is a third-degree felony carrying up to 7 years in prison." I pulled my official ID from my pocket. "Now, who sent you here?" Their faces drained of color so quickly I thought one might faint on my welcome mat. "It was just supposed to be a scare tactic, sir," the shorter one stammered. "Ms. Whitfield said you were ignoring her notices about your flower beds and that you needed to be taught a lesson." Karen Whitfield. The HOA president who'd been leaving increasingly threatening notices on my door about my native plant garden. The same woman who tried to fine me $100 per day for having wildflowers instead of the regulation Kentucky bluegrass. The woman I'd politely informed that Pennsylvania's environmental protection laws superseded her HOA regulations regarding native plant landscaping. "Wait here," I said, retrieving my phone. I called my chief deputy. "Janet? I need a patrol car at my home. I have 2 individuals impersonating police officers attempting to make an arrest on behalf of my HOA president." I gave her the address. "And Janet? Pull everything we have on Karen Whitfield. I think we've found something interesting." The officers, who turned out to be security guards at a local mall, were cooperative once they realized the gravity of their situation. They were handcuffed and placed in the back of a real police car 20 minutes later, but I recommended leniency in exchange for their testimony. After all, my real target was the woman who had orchestrated this charade. I had no idea then that this bizarre morning would unravel a web of corruption, embezzlement, and intimidation tactics that had plagued our community for years, or that Karen Whitfield would resort to increasingly desperate measures when she discovered she'd tried to strong-arm the wrong homeowner. The funny thing is, all I'd wanted was to grow some black-eyed Susans in peace. The interrogation room at the county courthouse wasn't designed for comfort. The fake officers, Mike Treadwell and Darren Jenkins, sat nervously across from me and Detective Julia Donovan, my office's lead investigator. "Let's start from the beginning," I said, recording device between us. "How do you know Karen Whitfield?" Mike, the shorter one, cleared his throat. "She's my girlfriend's aunt. She approached us 3 weeks ago saying she needed help with a community demonstration to show residents what happens when they defy HOA regulations. She specifically asked for us because we have security uniforms," Darren added. "She provided the badges and told us it was just a scare tactic, completely legal because HOAs have special authority." I raised an eyebrow. "And you believe that?" They exchanged glances. "She's very convincing," Mike said quietly. And she paid cash. $500 each. Julia leaned forward. Did Ms. Whitfield target anyone else this way? 3 other homeowners, Darren admitted. One elderly man with unpermitted solar panels, a woman who painted her door teal instead of the approved forest green, and a family who put up a basketball hoop. I felt my jaw tighten. And what happened with those homeowners? They were scared. The old man wrote a check for the fines on the spot. The woman with the door started crying and promised to repaint it. The family took down the basketball hoop that afternoon. Did you identify yourselves as police officers? Julia asked. Not exactly, Mike said uncomfortably. We just showed the badges and said we were there to enforce community standards. Most people assumed we were police. I scribbled notes while considering the charges: impersonating law enforcement, intimidation, extortion, possibly racketeering if the HOA funds were being misappropriated. What had started as a bizarre morning was looking more like a criminal conspiracy. One more question, I said. Did Karen Whitfield ever mention what happens to the money collected from these fines? The two exchanged another glance. Darren spoke first. She mentioned something about a community improvement fund, but Mike overheard something else. Mike looked down at his hands. Last week, I was waiting for her in her home office while she finished a call. She was talking to someone about transferring money from the compliance account to somewhere in the Caymans. Said something about finally having enough for the condo. I felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the kind that comes when a case suddenly breaks wide open. I glanced at Julia, whose slight nod confirmed she was thinking the same thing: embezzlement. Thank you, gentlemen. Detective Donovan will take your formal statements. I believe you've been very helpful, and that will be noted in any charging recommendations. As I left the room, my phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Financial records show Oak Ridge HOA collected $378,642 in compliance fees last year. Community improvement expenses, $42,119. No record of remaining funds. I smiled grimly. Oh, Karen. You picked the wrong garden to trample. What I didn't know then was that Karen Whitfield had eyes everywhere in our community, including the courthouse. And she was already planning her countermove. I was reviewing the search warrant for the HOA financial records when my secretary buzzed through. Mr. Lambert? There's a Julia Donovan here to see you. I frowned. Julia had left an hour ago to execute that very warrant. Send her in. The woman who entered wasn't Julia. She was in her 50s with expensively highlighted blonde hair, wearing a cream St. John knit suit that probably cost more than a month of my salary. Her smile was practiced and cold. You're not Julia, I said, standing. No, but I needed to speak with you privately. She closed the door behind her. Karen Whitfield. I believe you've been asking about me. My training kept my expression neutral despite my surprise. The audacity of this woman walking into the Attorney General's office after what she'd done was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I gestured to a chair. Ms. Whitfield. I was planning to speak with you later today. You've saved me a trip. She sat with the confident posture of someone accustomed to getting her way. I thought we should clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding before things escalate unnecessarily. Misunderstanding? I remained standing. 2 men impersonating police officers attempted to arrest me at your direction this morning. That's a felony, not a misunderstanding. She waved a manicured hand dismissively. Those idiots took things too literally. I simply asked them to demonstrate the consequences of ignoring community standards. They were never supposed to use the word arrest. They had handcuffs, Ms. Whitfield. Props, she said smoothly. For emphasis. No different than those costume badges. I leaned against my desk. And the other homeowners they intimidated? The elderly man with solar panels? The family with the basketball hoop? A flash of surprise crossed her face before she composed herself. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Just like I think you know about the missing $336,523 from the HOA accounts last year. The money supposedly earmarked for community improvements that never materialized. Her smile tightened. I'd be careful making accusations without evidence, Mr. Lambert. Our HOA has very powerful members. Judges. Politicians. People who could make your career disappear as easily as they could approve it. Was she threatening me? In my own office? Are you suggesting that elected officials are involved in your embezzlement scheme? I'm suggesting that smart men know when to look the other way. She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across my desk. Perhaps this will help you understand the bigger picture. I didn't touch it. What is this? A gesture of goodwill. The HOA is prepared to exempt your property from all current and future landscaping regulations. Additionally, we're prepared to make a substantial donation to your re-election campaign fund. All we ask is that you recognize this morning's incident for what it was, a misunderstanding between neighbors. I stared at her, momentarily speechless at the brazenness of attempting to bribe the state attorney general. Ms. Whitfield, are you attempting to obstruct a criminal investigation? Her smile didn't waver. I'm attempting to resolve a neighborhood dispute amicably. The envelope contains a landscaping variance, not cash. Though we're certainly open to supporting your political aspirations financially, through proper channels, of course. I reached for my phone. Ms. Whitfield, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted bribery of a public official and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. She stood abruptly, face flushing. You have no idea who you're dealing with. One phone call and this investigation ends. One call. The door opened and Julia, the real Julia Donovan, entered with 2 uniformed officers. Actually, Ms. Whitfield, we have a pretty good idea who we're dealing with. She held up a flash drive. We found your offshore accounts and recorded audio of you instructing your officers to intimidate homeowners. Karen's composed facade cracked. That's inadmissible. You had no warrant for that. I smiled. Actually, we did. Signed an hour ago, when evidence of financial crimes emerged from our investigation into the impersonation charges. Wonderful thing about financial crimes, they open so many doors. As they led her away, still protesting about her connections and making threats, I picked up the envelope she'd left. Inside was a landscaping variance certificate, and a check for $50,000 made out to Lambert Campaign Fund. I placed both in an evidence bag, marveling at how a dispute over wildflowers had uncovered what was looking increasingly like a criminal enterprise masquerading as a homeowners association. What I didn't anticipate was how deep the corruption went, or that Karen Whitfield's claim about powerful connections wasn't entirely a bluff. 2 days later, I was working late when my desk phone rang. The caller ID showed Commissioner's office. Lambert, I answered. Francis, it's Richard. Police Commissioner Richard Garcia had been my ally in several major cases. His tone was unusually tense. I thought you should know, Judge Markham just threw out your search warrant for the HOA records and released Karen Whitfield. I sat up straight. What? On what grounds? Insufficient probable cause. He said the testimony of 2 self-admitted impersonators wasn't enough to justify the financial investigation. Markham. The name triggered a memory from the fake officer's testimony, something about powerful HOA members. Richard, can you check if Judge Markham lives in Oak Ridge Estates? Already did. Not only does he live there, but his wife is on the HOA board. I'm also getting pressure from the mayor's office to handle this quietly. Something about not wanting to alarm the community about false accusations. The pieces were falling into place. They're circling the wagons. Looks like it. Watch your back, Francis. Whitfield was bragging in the station about how you wouldn't last a week as AG. After hanging up, I stared at the case files spread across my desk. With the search warrant invalidated, much of our evidence was now inadmissible. Karen Whitfield had powerful friends indeed, but she'd made one critical mistake. She'd sent fake police to my door. That case didn't rely on financial records or search warrants. We had the fake officer's testimony and my first-hand account. It wasn't enough to prove embezzlement, but it was enough to keep investigating. I called Julia. We need a new approach. Meet me at my house in an hour. When Julia arrived at my home, I had laid out everything we knew on my dining room table. If we can't go through official channels, we go grassroots. How many homeowners are in Oak Ridge Estates? About 300 households, she said, examining my notes. And according to our fake officers, at least 3 other homeowners were intimidated with the same tactic. If Karen's been running this scheme for years, Julia caught on immediately. There could be dozens of victims. Exactly. And while Judge Markham can block our financial investigation, he can't stop private citizens from filing police reports about intimidation or fraud. We spent the next 2 hours crafting a carefully worded letter to every household in Oak Ridge Estates. It didn't accuse the HOA of anything directly. That would be legally problematic. Instead, it asked residents to come forward if they had experienced unusual enforcement methods from anyone claiming authority within the community. We'll need to distribute these discreetly, Julia said. If Whitfield gets wind of this. She won't, I assured her. I have a better idea than mail. The next morning was Saturday. I recruited 12 trusted investigators from my office, all dressed in civilian clothes, to help distribute the letters personally. We called it Operation Neighborhood Watch. What we didn't anticipate was running directly into Karen Whitfield herself, standing at the end of my driveway as I prepared to leave with a stack of letters. More landscaping violations, Mr. Attorney General? She asked, eyeing the papers in my hand. Her smile was predatory. Just getting to know my neighbors better, I replied calmly. Something HOA presidents should appreciate. She stepped closer. Let me save you some time. Your investigation is dead. Judge Markham has already referred your conduct to the Ethics Committee for inappropriately targeting a community organization. Your career will be over before those flowers of yours bloom. I maintained my composure. Interesting approach, Ms. Whitfield. Intimidation worked with the elderly man with solar panels and the family with the basketball hoop, so you assume it will work with everyone. You have no evidence those incidents occurred. Don't I? I removed a small digital recorder from my pocket. Your officers were quite thorough in their statements. And while Judge Markham may have invalidated the financial search warrant, their testimony about intimidating homeowners at your direction stands. Her eyes narrowed. You're recording this conversation. Pennsylvania is a 2-party consent state, Ms. Whitfield. This recorder isn't on. I just thought you should know that your intimidation tactics won't work with me. She stepped back, regaining her composure. Enjoy your gardening, Mr. Lambert. While you still live here. She turned and walked toward a black SUV idling at the curb. Julia approached after Karen's SUV pulled away. That looked intense. She's running scared, I said, and making threats. Let's get these letters out before she can mobilize her board members to interfere. By midday, we had delivered letters to every home in Oak Ridge Estates. By evening, my office voicemail had 17 messages from homeowners wanting to talk about unusual enforcement methods. The wall of silence was beginning to crack. What I didn't realize was how dangerous a cornered Karen Whitfield could be, or that she was already planning to destroy evidence that could send her to prison for years. Sunday morning, I was enjoying coffee on my back porch when smoke billowed above the tree line 3 blocks away, exactly where the HOA offices were located. I called 911 immediately, then jumped in my car. By the time I arrived, fire trucks were already on the scene. The small building that housed the HOA offices was engulfed in flames. A crowd of neighbors had gathered, watching in shock as firefighters battled the blaze. I spotted Karen standing near the front, her face a mask of concern as she spoke with a fire captain. I kept my distance but caught fragments of their conversation. All our community records, she was saying. Tax documents, financial statements, everything. The captain was nodding sympathetically. Once we contain the fire, we'll do our best to salvage what we can, ma'am. I moved through the crowd, looking for familiar faces. I found Walter Jenkins, the HOA treasurer, standing apart from the others, his expression more angry than concerned. "Quite a coincidence," I said, stepping beside him. "A fire the day after homeowners start coming forward about HOA intimidation tactics." Walter glanced at me, then back at the burning building. "Not a coincidence at all." His voice was low, bitter. "You think it was deliberate?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I know it was. Karen called an emergency board meeting for 7 a.m. this morning. When I arrived, she and Vice President Helen Morris were carrying boxes to Helen's car. They said they were securing essential documents before organizing the files." I kept my voice casual. "What kind of documents?" "Financial records, mostly. I thought it was strange since I'm the treasurer. When I asked to see what they were taking, Karen said they needed to make copies off-site. Told me to start sorting the membership files instead." He shook his head. "I went to the storage room as instructed. 20 minutes later, I smelled smoke coming from the main office. By the time I got there, the filing cabinets were in flames. Karen and Helen were gone." My prosecutor's instincts went on high alert. "Mr. Jenkins, would you be willing to make an official statement about what you saw?" He turned to face me fully. "You're that Attorney General, aren't you? The one with the wildflower garden Karen's been complaining about." I nodded. "I've been treasurer for 8 years," he said. "For the past 3, the numbers haven't added up. Whenever I questioned discrepancies, Karen had explanations that never quite satisfied me, but I couldn't prove anything wrong." He squared his shoulders. "So yes, I'll make a statement. This has gone far enough." I called Julia immediately and asked her to bring a team to the scene. Then I approached the fire captain. "Captain, when you've contained the blaze, I need to request that your arson investigators secure the scene. This may be destruction of evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation." He looked surprised but nodded. "We already suspected arson. The fire started in multiple locations simultaneously." I watched Karen across the parking lot, now on her phone, gesturing emphatically. She caught my eye and froze momentarily before turning away. Within an hour, Julia arrived with 2 investigators and a digital forensic specialist. Walter Jenkins gave his statement, describing not only the morning's events but 3 years of financial irregularities he had documented privately. "Karen kept 2 sets of books," he explained, showing us files he'd kept at his home. "One for board meetings showing modest amounts in our accounts, and another that only she and Helen had access to. The real accounts had hundreds of thousands more than reported." "Do you have copies of both sets?" Julia asked. "Better than that," Walter said. "I have the originals from last quarter that I was reviewing at home. And backup drives of the HOA financial software going back 5 years. Karen doesn't know I kept them. It was the break we needed." With Walter's evidence and testimony, we had enough to request a new search warrant, one that Judge Markham couldn't easily dismiss. More importantly, we now had evidence suggesting arson and obstruction of justice, which fell squarely under state jurisdiction. As we finished taking Walter's statement, my phone rang. It was Janet from my office. "Sir, you need to get back here immediately. The governor just called. Judge Markham has filed an emergency motion to have you recused from any investigation involving Oak Ridge Estates, citing conflict of interest as a resident. The hearing is tomorrow morning." I thanked her and hung up, explaining the situation to Julia. "They're trying to run out the clock," she said. "If they can delay long enough to destroy more evidence." "We don't have until tomorrow," I agreed. "We need to move now." I called the district attorney directly, explaining the situation and the evidence we now had of arson and obstruction. Unlike Judge Markham, DA Monica Perez had no connections to Oak Ridge Estates and had built her reputation on anti-corruption cases. "Send everything you have," she said after hearing me out. "If there's probable cause for arson and obstruction, I can have arrest warrants within 2 hours. But Francis, be careful. If you're directly involved in the arrests after that recusal motion was filed." "I understand," I assured her. "I'll coordinate from my office, but my team will work with your investigators on the ground." As I drove back to my office, I caught a glimpse of Karen Whitfield's black SUV heading toward the highway, in the direction of the private airport. She was running. What I didn't know then was that Karen had one more card to play, one that would put not just my case but my home and safety in jeopardy. I worked through the night with D.A. Perez's team, compiling evidence and preparing warrants. By 6 a.m., we had arrest warrants for both Karen Whitfield and Helen Morris on charges of arson, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. The financial crimes would come later, once we had more thoroughly reviewed Walter Jenkins' records. I finally headed home around 7 a.m. to shower and change before the emergency hearing on my recusal. As I turned onto my street, I saw 3 large trucks parked in front of my house and men in work clothes swarming my property. One was operating a backhoe that was currently tearing up my wildflower garden. I screeched to a halt and jumped out of my car. "What the hell is going on here?" A man in a hard hat approached with a clipboard. "HOA ordered remediation of code violations, sir." "Are you the homeowner?" "I am, and there is no approved action for my property," I said, pulling out my phone to call police. He handed me a document. "Emergency abatement order, signed last night by the HOA board. You were given notice." I scanned the document, which was indeed signed by the board, minus Walter Jenkins, authorizing immediate removal of non-compliant landscaping and structural elements at my address. At the bottom was a statement indicating the homeowner would be billed $14,800 for the work. "This is illegal," I said. "You need to stop immediately." "Sorry, sir. We have authorization." He pointed to a sheriff's deputy standing nearby. "And law enforcement supervision to proceed." I approached the deputy, showing my identification. "Deputy, I'm Francis Lambert, State Attorney General. This action is being conducted as retaliation for a criminal investigation. I need you to halt this operation now." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I was assigned to prevent disturbances during a lawful HOA abatement. I don't have authority to stop their work." "Who assigned you?" "Judge Markham's office called the sheriff directly." "Of course." Markham again. I dialed Julia's number. "Julia, I need immediate assistance at my home. The HOA is destroying my property under an emergency abatement order, with a deputy placed by Judge Markham to ensure it happens." While waiting for help, I documented everything with my phone camera, capturing video of the workers tearing out my garden and beginning to dismantle the wooden pergola in my backyard. As I filmed, a worker approached with another document. "Notice of fine for prohibited recording of HOA authorized activities, $500, he said, handing me the paper. "You can't be serious." He shrugged. "Just delivering it, sir." 20 minutes later, Julia arrived with 2 state police officers who outranked the deputy. After reviewing the situation, they ordered work stop pending resolution of jurisdictional questions. The workers grumbled but complied, having already destroyed most of my garden and damaged the pergola. "This is blatant intimidation," Julia said, surveying the damage. "They're trying to send a message." "Where are we on locating Karen and Helen?" I asked. "Helen was arrested at her home 30 minutes ago. Karen's not at her residence or the country club. Her phone is going straight to voicemail." My emergency hearing was in 2 hours, and I looked like I hadn't slept in days, which was accurate. I asked Julia to coordinate with the state police to secure my property while I quickly showered and changed. When I emerged from my bedroom, Julia was in my living room with an evidence bag. "You need to see this. We found it in Helen Morris's purse during processing." Inside was a one-way ticket to Grand Cayman in Karen Whitfield's name. The flight had departed at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the cruise arrived at my house. "She's running," I said. "And left Helen to take the fall." "Not exactly," Julia said grimly. "Helen's talking. Turns out Karen promised to wire her money once she was settled in the Caymans. Instead, Helen just received this text." She showed me her phone with an image of a text message. "Sorry about the change in plans. Your confession letter has been delivered to police. Enjoy prison." Confession letter? A typed letter allegedly from Helen confessing to embezzling HOA funds and acting alone and intimidating homeowners and setting the fire. It was delivered to the sheriff's office an hour ago. I shook my head in disbelief. Karen planned to sacrifice Helen all along. Helen thinks so too. She's offered to tell us everything in exchange for consideration during sentencing, including where Karen's been hiding the money. Despite my exhaustion, I felt a surge of determination. Let's get that statement before my hearing. And contact Cayman authorities. Karen may have fled, but her money doesn't have to stay hidden. The hearing before the Judicial Ethics Panel was tense, but ultimately went in my favor. With Helen Morris's detailed statement implicating both Karen Whitfield and Judge Markham in the HOA scheme, the panel not only rejected the motion to recuse me but referred Judge Markham himself for investigation. As I left the courthouse, my phone rang with an unfamiliar international number. Mr. Lambert? This is Inspector James with Royal Cayman Islands Police. We've detained a Karen Whitfield attempting to access a safety deposit box at First Caribbean Bank. Your office requested we hold her for extradition? I smiled for what felt like the first time in days. That's correct, Inspector. We'll have the paperwork to you within the hour. Very good, sir. One other thing, she was carrying quite a lot of documentation. Financial records, property deeds, and what appear to be minutes of HOA meetings going back several years. Inspector, you've just made my day. Please secure all of those materials as evidence. When I returned to my office, Janet handed me a stack of messages. Over 40 homeowners from Oak Ridge Estates had called, all wanting to share stories of HOA intimidation, excessive fines, and harassment. The wall of silence hadn't just cracked, it had completely collapsed. 1 month later I surveyed my newly replanted garden with satisfaction. Native wildflowers were already sprouting, and the rebuilt pergola was actually an improvement over the original. Next to me stood Frank Rodriguez, the new interim HOA president, appointed after the entire board except Walter Jenkins had been implicated in the scheme. The community vote for the new landscaping guidelines passed unanimously, Frank said. Native plants are now explicitly permitted, and we've capped fines at reasonable levels with an appeals process. That's excellent progress, I said. How are people adjusting to the new transparency requirements? Some growing pains, but most are relieved. Having all financial records accessible online and requiring 2 signatures on expenditures over $500 has restored a lot of trust. He hesitated. We also voted to cover the cost of restoring your garden. It's the least we could do after what happened. I nodded appreciatively. Thank you. That means a lot. In the month since Karen's arrest, the case had expanded beyond anything I'd initially imagined. Forensic accountants had discovered nearly $1.2 million missing from HOA accounts over 5 years. Karen had used intimidation tactics against at least 27 homeowners, collecting thousands in unauthorized fines. Judge Markham had received consulting fees for using his position to block investigations, and 2 other local officials had accepted bribes to look the other way. Karen Whitfield now faced 38 criminal charges ranging from embezzlement to extortion to obstruction of justice. Helen Morris was cooperating as a witness in exchange for a reduced sentence. Judge Markham had resigned and was under investigation by the Judicial Ethics Committee. As Frank left, Julia pulled up in her department SUV. Final homeowner interview complete, she announced, joining me beside the garden. That's all 43 victims documented. D.A. Perez says the case is airtight. Good work, I said. Any word on the extradition hearing? Scheduled for next week. Cayman authorities are cooperating fully, especially after finding Karen had accounts there under 3 different names. She surveyed my garden. Looking better. Getting there. I still can't believe all this started over wildflowers. Julia laughed. Not just any wildflowers. The Attorney General's wildflowers. Karen Whitfield really should have checked who she was dealing with before sending fake cops to your door. I smiled, watching a monarch butterfly land on a newly planted milkweed. You know what the irony is? If she just left me alone, I probably never would have noticed her scheme. The classic criminal mistake, drawing attention unnecessarily. We stood silently for a moment, enjoying the peaceful garden. Then Julia's phone buzzed. The forensic team found something interesting in Karen's Cayman documents, she said, reading the message. Looks like she has similar HOA schemes operating in 3 other states. I sighed. So much for my quiet weekend. On the bright side, at least now you can grow whatever you want in your garden. I chuckled, looking at my modest wildflower patch that had inadvertently brought down a criminal enterprise. Sometimes, Julia, standing your ground over a small principle reveals much bigger issues beneath the surface. She nodded toward my garden. And sometimes wildflowers are worth fighting for. I couldn't have agreed more.